Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the How Good Online Innovation Series. My name is Leah Wolf. I'm the head of regenerative education and content here at How Good. I am so excited to continue our series on regenerative supply at scale. We have some true innovators joining us today for our discussion. We're going to be considering the question, among others, how we can communicate and deliver the value of seasonal and regional regenerative products to a broader audience of consumers. And so joining us today, we have Alex Piasecki, who is the co-founder and COO of Seal the Seasons, James Lum, who is the director of R&D for Defiant Food Group, and we have Philip Taylor, who is the founder of Mad Agriculture. So a quick run through of our agenda. We're having our introduction now. We'll have a panel discussion for about 35 minutes with our thought leaders. Then we'll have the opportunity to go into breakout rooms for some community discussion. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A at the end, and we'll finish up right at the top of the hour. Also, we have some upcoming sessions that are not to be missed. Wednesday, September 15th, so next Wednesday, we have Sorella Harada from Simply Good Ingredients and Tucker Garrison from Imlakesh Organics to talk about, as they are trailblazers in ethical sourcing. And on October 7th, we're excited to talk about the new material age in packaging with Kelly Williams from Fujimura and Jay Ashworth from Associated Labels and Packaging. So without further ado, we will get started. So I'd love to start. This is something that Ethan, who's our Chief Innovation Officer and who has typically led these sessions, likes to do. And I think it's a great way to get started. He calls it intro by the numbers. And so I'd love to hear from each of you a number that you feel either represents your organization or is something that you're excited about, a recent accomplishment, and I can get us started. I'm gonna say the number 33,000, which is the number of different ingredients and products that are in the How Good sustainability database. So why don't we start with you, Alex, and then we can go James and then Phil.
That's one I usually would have to think about. I would say 85. We measure a lot of different things at Seal the Seasons as a brand, but the thing I'm most passionate about is the number of family farms that we work with across the country. That number fluctuates year to year, but we have increased from we initially started at the farmers market with 4 to now working with a variety network of family farms. Mostly in fruit and vegetable, 85, I have to say. That's probably it.
That's great. Thank you so much. James, you're up next.
So this is a good question. I'm going to go with 100 because something that I'm really proud about as R&D director and somebody that is heavily involved in the sourcing here is that 100% of the beef products that we have produced and sold in the past year have been grass-fed. We've been able to do this, A, because the global market is in our favor right now, B, by leveraging a lot of the relationships we have in the industry, both imported and domestic. And one thing that's particularly interesting and fun about that number is that we've been able to convert a couple of recipes, or a couple of customers rather, from using more factory farmed, grain finished domestic product to a grass-fed, grass-finished product that's just healthier for the environment and the world.
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm going to say what my 6-year-old son would say to me when we do our number competitions, which is a Google. He always outcompetes me on how far he can count. And I like the idea of sort of a limitless, numberless sort of ambition. Like, I feel in the Western world, we get caught up in numbers all the time. I left academia because it was too quantitative. And the last couple of days, I've been in sort of supra quant, and a Google kind of describes that.
Cool. All
I don't know if that
right.
makes sense or not, but just kind of felt like that's what I wanted to say.
No, I love it. I think that especially as we're talking about regenerative and it's this sort of a journey, not a destination mentality, it's important to keep that in mind. And I think we do get kind of caught up in quantifying things and goals and bottom lines. And so it's good to keep in mind that there are bigger, more important journeys to be had. So I'd love to talk a little bit, all of your companies are dedicated to sort of filling a gap between regenerative supply, regenerative producers, and consumers. And so I'd love if you want to just say in kind of one sentence what it is that your company does in that realm, and then kind of maybe where else you see a need to help regenerative producers either access the market or take advantage of economy of scale up those regenerative products while maintaining their integrity. And so why don't we go in opposite order this time? Why don't we do Phil, James, Alex?
Yeah, so Mad Ag could talk a lot about sort of philosophically what we aspire to, but I'll just get very practical and say that we really help farmers transition to and thrive in regenerative organic agriculture. And we do that with three main value offerings that harmonize in their best form. And those value offerings are sort of the guts of land and business planning. So how do you get the ecology and the finance working in a place that's respectable of big questions like what does that land want to be? What does that land need us to be? And so we do a lot of kind of, building balance sheets, helping rotational grazing designs, integrating cover crops, all of those kinds of things. And then we have sort of two support arms that help mobilize that vision for the farmer, which is access to equitable financing through our capital arm called the Perennial Fund. And then that capital is often the catalyst for transformation. And then the ongoing sustainability is our markets program, where we work on behalf of our farmers to connect them to values aligned buyers, where we not only connect farmers to brands, we also connect brands to farmers with origination. And a lot of that is focused on sort of an effort to decommodify commodities, sort of eliminate the human story, the story of place, the value inherent in what they're growing as it loses its face, its story, its name, its virtue. And so while commodities are great at finding really low costs, equal to the cost of production in an ideal economic format, we really try to add value and build story and place and brand for those brands, for those farmers, to sort of rehumanize the food system in a way. And so a lot of that does focus on re-regionalizing. We work with large-scale row crop farmers, between 200 and 12,000 acres from Oregon to Louisiana. And so in the farm sector that we work in, that we often refer to them as like kind of farmers of the middle. They're sort of stranded between this like get big, get out kind of mentality of massive industrial ag, and then the small diversified farms that we often find selling into our farmer markets. And so you have these family farms full of good virtue that are stuck in like growing corn and beans. So they're only sort of halfway expressing what they really want to do. And so markets are really one of the strongest enablers of regeneration, because farmers most often just grow what they can sell. And if you can just sell corn and beans and alfalfa, it severely limits not only the utility and nutritional benefits of all the food where it ends up in the sort of broader society, but it also severely limits what you can do on the farm. And regeneration, for me, they're sort of the king and queen of regeneration, which is diversifying your operation and perennializing it as much as possible. And those are very, very hard to do if you don't have markets. And so a lot of what we do is we focus on sort of creating those new relationships for the farmers, for the brands, and kind of bundling up a variety of strategies to make that relationship evolve and happen. And then bundling up not only the strategy and the approach and the piloting, but we also bring along all of the kind of metrics of success, qualitative and quantitative, so that the brand can go to market with a powerful story and the farmer can be financially compensated to reflect the ecological investments they've been making in creating public goods for all of us. So that's sort of our approach and what we're doing. And I'm happy to dig in as you like.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. James, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Defiant Food Group we are in the sous vide protein space. So what we're doing is leveraging sous vide technology to optimize essentially optimize the use of proteins across the board. So what we're doing by using sous vide and selling ready to eat products is we're extending the shelf life. We're optimizing the carcass utilization of the animals, and we're maximizing the access to nutrients via the product. Traditional cooking methods typically unravel the proteins. You lose a lot of nutrient density through that process. So a lot of regenerative ag, and my eyes and in my experience, has been trying to buy better, eat less. And through the power of sous vide, we're able to do that. We're able to portion control. We're able to get maximal nutrition out of the portions that we're selling. And then via the cook methodologies that we use, we're searching every day for new and more effective ways of using different cuts on the animals that we can then market as something that is previously going into grinds and sold at bottom dollar, or shipping across seas to again sell at bottom dollar. So the hardest thing for protein producers, for livestock farmers and ranchers is getting as much money out of the animal as they possibly can. And when 60% of that animal is going into grinds or lower quality products, then you're not maximizing the viability of the product. So that's really the gap that we're trying to bridge. I think we're in the fledgling stages of doing that. We're only about a year old now, and the sky's the limit. I think that this technology has up until now really not been tapped for that purpose. We're looking at optimizing back of house operations and creating convenient products for consumers, but really nobody other than Defiant, in my mind, is looking at it from a sustainability standpoint. And I think that's really important for our mission as a company.
Totally. And making those offcuts more accessible. And are you supplying to restaurants as well as retailers? And is that something that is helpful in your sort of value added supply chain of being able to send those offcuts that might otherwise go to grind are a little bit more appealing to maybe a restaurant that's looking for something really consistent?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a couple interesting anecdotes around that. We've seen a lot of success in the e-commerce space. For one, to give you a little bit of backstory, we basically launched and then COVID hit like a month later. So we were most of our customers that we were in communication with prior to March of last year were food service. So we were really going at it from the approach of optimizing the back of house operations and improving the yields of our restaurants. And then through that, kind of leading them towards higher quality products in the process. When kind of things started to happen in March and April of last year, we really had to shift and focus on e-commerce and retail because that's where the market was. And through that, we were working on a few products for one of our e-commerce partners. And one of the problems we kept running into is, we wanted to look at portion cutting for a number of reasons, but partially for just, portion control for the consumer. But we kept ending up with byproduct. And so we ended up creating a SKU with the said byproduct off of 3 other products. And that byproduct SKU ended up outselling the others, which was pretty interesting, but it kept, we ended up keeping, literally thousands of pounds out of grind by doing that, and then selling it at a higher value for our customer, that was pretty cool and a really big win for us. And we've done that. We've kind of applied that strategy to a few of our customers, especially. I think I'm the only one here that's in the protein space or the animal protein space specifically, but the market globally has been pretty volatile over the last year. So that's another challenge that we've been trying to approach with our innovative minds and using sous vide to kind of mitigate those challenges and those risks. So we have some customers that, you know, they're pulling products from the menu because the raw material prices are through the roof, and we're taking that as an opportunity to be like, look, well, maybe there's some other cuts that we can look at that are not trading as high a value or high a monetary value, and we can create a really great product for you that's going to work, and it's going to help our vendor in the long run too, because it's a product that they're sitting on.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, well, and both of us coming from butchering backgrounds, it's just every ounce counts, runs through my brain on a pretty daily basis. So anytime that you can find ways to make money off of those things that would otherwise go to waste is always great. Alex, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about Seal the Seasons and kind of, you know, how what you guys do is helping those 85 farmers that you work with across the country access that market and take advantage of the economies of scale that aggregating can accomplish.
Yeah. I was thinking through like how to sum it into like one sentence, and it is a little difficult, but I do think what we do ultimately is we use branding and storytelling to enhance, you know, markets for value-added, locally grown, family-grown produce. That's what it is. You know, we really believe that we provide the best frozen fruits and vegetables out there because we work with, you know, very intentionally with farms on specific varieties, and we're very down to the nitty-gritty of how they're growing their produce. And so we really think that this first channel, just getting their fruit to be available year round in the frozen aisle is a huge step. And we're also charging a premium, which allows us to, you know, again, insulate us from the global economy around fruit, which, you know, James, to your point, it's also been pretty volatile, you know, whether it be weather, you know, crisis, you know, the COVID, it's been, you know, very, very difficult for global markets around fruits and vegetables to really stabilize. So we've created kind of local supply chains that operate, you know, it's always interconnected, but a little bit in, you know, in their own concert. So, you know, ultimately, you know, what Seal the Seasons does, we have an end product, a branded product that, you know, is featuring the farmer on the front. It's telling you exactly what state and what city that farm is. And we're getting even more specific now, down to like talking about specific varieties. Like we really love the Ruby June strawberries. It's a, you know, a strawberry variety that's extremely sweet and has a pretty decent yield versus, you know, a lot of the fresh market berries you'll get are optimized for shelf life. So, you know, ultimately what we want to do is open up the market for value-added produce so that, you know, brands can, you know, pick the best and sweetest strawberries for their value-added products, whether it be a puree that they're adding in or a strawberry they're adding to a baked good, or you know, strawberry puree into yogurt. Like we've provided that outlet for people. It's not our primary reason for existing, but we really do see that as being a huge opportunity to expand the regenerative, you know, family farm produce that we're doing today as part of Seal the Seasons.
Cool. Yeah, that's, I mean, something that I think that each of you have touched on in a little bit of a different way is this idea of consistency in product and meeting the expectations of not only the consumers, but these large scale buyers. So for example, traditionally buying for shelf life or a consistent size, or meeting consumer expectations around grain-fed versus grass-fed. And I wonder if any of you, what kind of conversations you're having with both your producers, but also with large-scale buyers about how to better meet in the middle to help this kind of scaling up of regenerative products. Phil, I see you nodding your head. Do you have something that is coming to mind right away? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sort of just two things bubbling up. One, I feel like it's a lot about aligning vision and goals, and for a buyer and a supplier to operate from a place of empathy and truly understanding the needs of each other and asking what that yields from like a more of a co-creative space than an antagonistic negotiation space. A lot of the work that we do, we kind of wrap up in this process called mutually beneficial supply agreements. And we actually get the brands and the suppliers are on the same table, and we're really transparent about the economics on the farm and what's required to actually do and create a regenerative product, the risk that's being taken, the cost of it, the inconvenience of it. And then on the brand side, we ask them to be transparent about their financials, about what they're expecting to make. And that doesn't always work. That's kind of aspirational, but we do have kind of shades of sharing that end up happening from the brand side. And a lot of that's in an effort to kind of rebalance the power relationship between grower and buyer, so that ultimately you create trust and camaraderie and friendship, which while it might come at a higher price tag for the brand, it develops not only great story and collateral and marketing, but it de-risks their supply in a pretty incredible way when you sort of know the family and the matriarch and patriarch and the kids and who's getting married, and that's not always possible, that level of transparency, but it kind of rehumanizes the economic relationship, and it has all of these like expected wins and then these unexpected ones that come along with it that usually translate to good dollars and win-win situations. So, that's the way that we do it. It's sort of operating from a place of empathy. We have a couple kind of core processes or frameworks. A lot of those frameworks have been inspired by Carol Sanford and Terragenesis and folks, on this call and community. And it's kind of a living adventure to decommodify, and that's part of the process that we use.
Yeah, amazing. I love that idea of decommodification as part of the regenerative framework. James, do you have any thoughts on how these buyers can meet our regenerative producers in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think Phil really kind of summed up my thoughts as well. It's really, our founder, CEO, really likes to talk about maintaining intimate relationships with not only our customers, but also our suppliers. And, I do a lot of that in my role as communicating with both our pack houses, our co-manufacturers, the suppliers, as well as the customers, and really just being very clear and keeping an open mind and understanding that we're all here to make a living and we're all here to hopefully make the world a better place at the end of the day. And nobody's trying to win anything over on the other, right? We need to work collaboratively. We need to work in concert with each other to do the best work that we can possibly do. And I don't know that I'm really adding anything to what Phil said, but I think he really hit the nail on the head.
No, I think you added a couple of great points. I think, so when I think of regenerative agriculture, at least from my perspective, is sort of the farm and the ecosystem dictating the market and the menu and not the other way around. And I think that each of your organizations do that in its own way. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how specifically you are fitting into that mindset. I think anyone can take this one.
I'll just add that it's been, I would say, supremely difficult to maintain these relationships during COVID. It's in my experience in past lives and businesses, a huge part of not only my personal role, but like my ethos as a business owner in the past, and just kind of a representative of the business now, is having FaceTime and visiting these people and getting to know them from a personal level and their perspective, and having to have meetings over the phone and Zoom and not being able to meet people in person. It's really hard to humanize each other and really remember that the person that you're talking to over the line is a person just like you. They probably have kids, and trying to remember that has been a challenge, I think, for all parties concerned. And it's been, I think it's a symptom of that has been a little bit of animosity in the business world, and trying to mitigate as best we can right now is really important.
Totally. And I would imagine too, just from my experience working with farmers and ranchers in the past, and knowing that there's a huge gap when it comes to rural broadband and accessing the modern economy. It's so important to have access to that kind of tech. I know that Phil, your organization does work to do farm planning and also do that sort of investment side. And so how has that been playing in? Has that side of the farm planning ramped up over the last year? And also would love to hear your response to the original question about market and menu, and sort of ecosystem dictating those things.
Yeah, and that's what we aspire to, sort of in that question, what does the land need us to be? It requires a very deep and ambitious journey in becoming, so I don't know if I even like this term, but I'll say it, becoming indigenous to place, where you sort of know what evolution wants to bring in its fullness and beauty into the world, and how do we live with that creatively versus combatively. And I think we're just on the tip of understanding even how to think about it. It's sort of like the next 10,000 year revolution that needs to happen. And so, there's ways to do it, especially in the sort of grass-fed holistic managed space where you're sort of working very explicitly with perennial ecosystems. And, I feel like that's one of the sort of North Stars around thinking about how the ecosystem dictates the menu, so to speak. And in row crops and annuals, it's a big challenge to do it, do it well. So I think I'll leave that at that. I think the other thing too, just is around the investment space, is that it's absolutely critical that capital flows into the farmer's hands, whether it's by markets or whether it's by financing. And we've made an enormous amount of headway. We raised like $10 million for a pilot fund to help transition and accelerate so we have a loan program that accelerates farmers to regen organic, and it's been widely adopted. I think we're financing like 10,000 acres right now in about 13 states across the upper Midwest. And it's going really well. And it's wild how there are like virtually zero forms of financing, capital, and debt that actually is even meant to do this. Most farmers are wrapped up within the industrial banking system that requires them to take farm insurance, which requires them to do corn and beans and neonics and glyphosate, and they won't get a line of credit from their banker for seeds next year, and fertility and labor if they don't have those things in place. So breaking out of this industrial thing is a colossal challenge, and markets are a great way to do it, and capital is sort of another way to do it. And so we're trying to surround the farmer with that kind of capital and markets, and then at the core of it, kind of community and technical assistance to sort of bring that like trifecta together for transformation. And it's going really well. We have great feedback coming from all kinds of people. I mean, there's a woman named Mary Ellen Corey who's like 60 years old, and she read our loan offering and started crying. She's like, you've given me words for 30 years of frustration, and it's a loan offering. It's just that's the kind of wildness that's happening. And I think why I tell that story is that as any of you looking to procure things from communities of the place, the most important thing to do is actually go there and meet them. And I resonated, James, with that sort of the COVID era where we're restricted to Zoom more often. And it's just, we take a 3-week field trip to meet all of our farmers every year. We pack the whole entire shop up here at Mad Ag and go tour around. And that on the ground contact is really the heart of where a lot of good work sort of sparks from. And so again, going back to strategies about how to connect supply and demand, it's like mutually beneficial agreements, time on the ground. Pilots are a really great place to start. Like you don't have to go that big to get going. Have a proof of concept, have a little eureka moment that works both for the farmer and your company, and then use that as like a flash to start from and galvanize people around. I think pilots, when well designed with shared outcomes, intended outcomes, can really go a long way to building trust and saying, yes, let's do it. So those are just some thoughts.
Yeah, and that's impressive. The $10 million investment is huge. And I know that, you know, when I was doing work behind the butcher counter and had interacted with farmers and ranchers and was connected to their story, I was so much more motivated to move their product and communicate their story directly to the customers that were on the other side. Obviously, the products that you guys are selling are CPG. You don't have the opportunity to have that conversation with the customer and really communicate their story. So I know, Alex, you talked a little bit about the way that you guys are using transparency to kind of communicate and use storytelling to you know, bring consumers into the fold of the hard work that your producers are doing. And so I don't know if you have any more to say to that, or if James, there are any strategies that Defiant is using to communicate to your customers the value of these regenerative and you know, regional products.
Yeah, I mean, I think Phil had mentioned a little bit earlier. It's something that, you know, when I graduated college, it was probably the main thing that propelled me was the, you know, I worked at a farmer's market, and that's how I got into this. Is I saw people being really excited about not only buying this produce, but also talking with the people, talking with the daughter, you know, really, you know, really just interacting with their producer, and that, and on a quantitative basis, paying probably 300 to 400% of what they probably could buy that same similar strawberry at somewhere else. So, you know, for us, that was a big telling moment where there's a premium to be had there. You just got to connect and create that human connection outside of that market. So on our packaging, we're very, very forward. We actually looked at all the other packaging in frozen fruits and vegetables and saw, hey, what do they emphasize? What's the first thing on their typeface? It's all about what it is. And I think we all kind of understand when we're going in the frozen fruit aisle, frozen vegetable aisle, we're buying a frozen blueberry. It doesn't need to be the biggest thing that you see right away. So what we changed up is we really made it a portrait and a postcard from the farmer, straight from that bag to your freezer. And, you know, really just honestly just hit them over the head with how this product is transparent. This is a real person, a real farm. And by buying this, you're making a good decision and you're completing that cycle. So, you know, that's kind of how we got started. I really do feel strongly about humanizing that in CPG. And, you know, we found the best way to do that with consumers is through packaging and also direct marketing, obviously. But with category managers at grocery stores, which is, you know, that's a different customer. It's a B2B interaction. It's not too different. You have to bring them to the farm. You have to bring them and show them and have everybody meet. And then there's such an immense appreciation for the difficult work it is to, you know, make blueberry bushes produce year after year, or bring strawberries to fruit year after year. And I think that's, you know, that connection. And I think people get excited about it too, is a field trip, you know, is really important and has been successful for us.
That's great. I think that's actually, I think I want to leave it there. I think that's a really good place to leave off for a second so that we can take a few minutes and have a little bit of community discussion in breakout rooms. You know, let's take this as an opportunity to kind of think collectively about any questions we might want to ask the speakers. And when we come back for the Q&A, you can either put them into the chat or feel free to just speak up. And I look forward to hearing your questions. Kate, you can go ahead and pop us into breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had enough time to introduce yourselves and maybe chat a little bit about what you've been hearing so far from our panelists, and maybe come up with some questions that you'd like to ask. Feel free to put them in the chat, or and I'll give anyone the opportunity now if you want to be brave and take yourself off mute and ask the group a question.
I'll ask a question.
Awesome.
So I was speaking with Danny from Patagonia Provisions, and something that I often hear with a lot of CPG conversations is like, hey, we really want to source from regenerative suppliers. However, it's kind of lacking from a scaling perspective, like just from an order size, we're not sure if the supplier could meet that at this time. And so I'm curious to hear from the speakers, like, what is the time scale at which we can expect regenerative supply to actually be able to meet those larger CPG orders that are more prominent in the food system today and on the market?
I mean, I can take the first crack at it. You know, for us, like it's I think the supply is there. And again, I'm speaking from a produce specific world, and also from the way my company defines regenerative agriculture, which we have 8 pillars, you know, that we define it as. So, you know, the supply exists. What we always have the conversation with people is it cannot be a one-time buy. This is not once. Like it's if you're going to take this farmer and you're going to put them through getting new equipment or getting ready to go, you can't go pull back the next year. So we don't really do anything that's going to be a one-time buy situation. And you know, sometimes it doesn't really work for folks, and I get that. Like, you know, that's cool. You know, but you know, the way that we built our business is based on years of trust, and I'm not going to leave these guys out to dry because of something, you know, because of a one-time opportunity. So, you know, I think the supply exists in produce. You know, obviously things happen in produce, but you know, we produce a ton of fruit and vegetables in this country. We produce enough. It's just about, you know, getting the markets to accept usually a bit higher price on some things, and prioritizing, you know, quality over quantity.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great point about price too.
Yeah, it ends up kind of being a breaking point a lot of times as well. And if it's at the price and length of like the interaction tends to be what we kind of gauge, because that's what makes it sustainable for both parties.
Thanks.
And I think, I mean, that makes me think, just from the pricing perspective, the consumer communication side of things, having those conversations to explain to the consumer why these things cost more. And I think that connecting it directly to the producer is one of the best ways that we can do that. I know that, I wonder, James, is that you said that you had a couple of customers who switched over from grain to grass-fed, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the way that you were able to either convince them, or the conversations that kind of led up to that decision.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation is generally like, can we use grass-fed? and their response is generally, as long as it meets our budgetary constraints. And then it's kind of our turn to try to meet those demands. I wish I was as confident as Alex in saying that the supply is there. I think the supply is getting there. I think Leah can speak to this. You know, when she and I probably started out in the business, grass-fed domestic beef was scant, to say the least, especially good grass-fed domestic beef. And now you're seeing larger and larger co-ops and aggregators out there producing really high quality stuff that can meet a lot of the demands of most of our consumers. I will say that it's not going to meet the demand of all of our consumers, particularly in the United States, where we're just huge meat consumers, for better or worse. You know, I'm not here to have that conversation right now. But I wish I could give you like a timeline to say when we're going to have, you know, 100% regenerative supply for all the demand out there. But it's promising to see that larger producers are responding to the demand, and it's getting better. Obviously, now we have to meet the challenges that climate change is presenting, particularly out in the Western states and Australia, which are our largest producers of grass-fed beef for the United States. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, but I will say that my experience over the last few years in getting to know some of these larger producers and suppliers is that, you know, we're responding to the demand. It's just, you know, unfortunately, to raise quality products, and especially in livestock agriculture, it's not an overnight thing. It's not even a seasonal thing. To raise good grass-fed beef, it takes 3 years before you're slaughtering something. So to give you, to give you some perspective. So yeah, unfortunately, that wasn't like a succinct, conclusive answer, but yeah, it's happening, and it's just going to happen in its own time.
Yeah, I think that and also that was a lot of helpful context just around, especially in the beef and protein world. And I love this question from Joao that's in the chat. And I think it sort of relates to the point that you made about the challenges that climate change are going to present in the future. But he's wondering what shifts could happen from a regulatory perspective or a legislative perspective that could enable regenerative food to become more mainstream. And I would like to tack onto that, maybe insulate some of our producers who are on the front lines of climate change, whether they're raising animals or growing crops.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way for regulation to like really push this forward is via federal intervention, which is most typically done farming through the Farm Bill. It expires in 2023. It was signed in 2018. So, my hope would be that we have lawmakers that are competent enough in the different complexities of agriculture to understand both the producer side, but also the need of the planet to find a way to do things a little bit better than we do in the past. So yeah, I mean that's for me. That's when I think about like how do we make things go. It's moving consumers and behavior, but it's got to there's federal intervention and federal capital, and I think that really doesn't come through until 2023.
Yeah, I would echo Alex. The Farm Bill is such a massive component that structures our ag system in the States. And, so much of it goes to scaffolding the industrial system with very, very little, allocated to support the kind of innovative farmers that we're aspiring to work with. And it's just a massive thing. It's not something that we do as an organization. We often translate what we're learning on the ground to policymakers through conversations, memos, and meetings and field tours. But there are thankfully some awesome organizations that are really, and there's some very awesome people within that Biden has chosen to be at the helm of some of the Farm Bill decision making that I'm really excited to see what they can do. So I think that's the Farm Bill has to change, and it will. But how aspirational will they be? And unfortunately, Tom Vilsack is less than aspirational, but he has some great people under him that hopefully have a loud voice. I would add on the regenerative supply side of things. I think it depends on what regenerative supply you're talking about. Are you defining it as a brand, like some of the big brands have been doing? Are you, Savory EOV? Are you, supporting the new regenerative organic certification? Like that makes a really big difference on the availability of supply. And I would resist defining regeneration or regenerative ag. I do think it is a very flexible concept, and that's part of its detriment as well. But certainly there's a lot of supply if your definition suits that supply. So it's part of the dilemma.
Totally. And I think that's a really great transition into a question from Lisa in the chat that's about transitioning to regenerative ag. I know at least two of you, maybe all three of you, are working with producers who are not necessarily organic, certainly not all regenerative. And that makes sense because it's a relatively small percentage of producers in the country and globally. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how each of your organizations are working to kind of bring those producers along on the transition to hopefully, sustainability, hopefully regenerative. And there's also a more specific question about the best way for suppliers who provide tech and support that support regenerative ag to reach farmers who do want to convert. And I think, Phil, maybe you have a good set of resources for reaching those types of producers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we support them, and there's kind of four ways that we support. The one is, really understanding the vision, the essence, the ambition of the farm and the farm family, and building trust at that human level, and really accompanying that level of human trust to like the real raw business planning. Like, how are you going to make money? What's your balance sheet look like? Show us your chart of accounts in QuickBooks. Is it disorganized? Are you paying your taxes well? Are you burning too much cash servicing debt? Like, really the guts of what makes a healthy business or not. And then, we've learned that you can do all that planning. You can do tons of planning, and you can like create this big vision, but it usually just lives in a binder on a bookshelf unless you have capital and markets to activate it. And then kind of really the important thing is the thing that weaves and connects like tissue, all of that is your community. Farmers especially change together, and they need to see it to believe it. And so, creating containers and conversations for farmers to meet new farmers and rebuild community is a really, really important thing in the process of transitioning. It gives people the courage, the hope, the confidence, it de-risks the knowledge. And so that community aspect is kind of perfuses all of our work. But thankfully there's just an enormous amount of groundswell of people across the world that are sort of doing all of this in different contexts. I think everything I just said, I've learned from other movements. And so it does feel like something emergent, far larger than, Mad Ag and the people on this call.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you for that. Alex or James, do you have any thoughts on how you're bringing along those suppliers who are maybe not resistant, but not necessarily already on the path to regenerative?
Yeah, I'm pretty firm believer in economics, and I think the most effective way we're gonna get more and more ranchers, farmers, and agricultural producers to turn away from some of the, we'll call them traditional methods, to more regenerative methods, is by taking enough of the market share. So that comes from a lot of communication and education to our consumers, our customers, about the quality and the opportunity of regenerative ag, and in pulling them to purchasing more of it, so that these other producers take notice. And it's, again, I mean, I think I've been in livestock for a while, so nothing happens overnight, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But it's really about taking enough of market share away from some of these larger producers to really sway the, to move the needle.
Yeah, and I on the producer side, I think farmers are not too unlike most people. Like, they have FOMO. So what we do is, I've always been surprised about when I work with family farms. Like, they tend to already they don't know what regenerative agriculture is, to be honest. That term doesn't really land, but they definitely know what they're doing. And when I talk them through it, like, they're doing soil testing. Oh, crop rotation. Yeah, that's good. Oh, there's some agroforestry. You're integrating these trees in. That makes sense. Oh, you're not, you're using erosion barriers. You're using irrigation management. It's like, you're doing it already, a lot of times. And so you just have to show, again, that like, by us working with those farms, those family farms, show the rest of the farming community that the way these folks are doing it is allowing them to access so many more markets. And again, a little bit economically driven, but also just a lot of people take a lot of pride of having their photo on a bag. So they want to make sure they do it the best way possible, and they kind of want to be on a bag too sometimes. As sheepish as some farmers can come off to be, there's an immense sense of pride of what they do. So yeah, I mean, I have to when it comes to producers, they're already doing a lot. They're doing a lot more than we probably give them credit for. It's more about like taking those steps around, hey, like, how can we start sharing this with everybody else that you farm with, that like is down the road. And that really just comes down to just like, having the conversations, taking somebody out for a bite of food. That's all it is.
Right. Showing them that it works, and showing them that you're committed to to making it work with them.
Yep.
I really want to get to this one last question from Lisa in the chat. And she says, small family farms and particularly women and minority farmers are often left behind when it comes to government funding. Are any of you, and particularly Phil, working to fill that gap? And I know that as we're talking about federal funding and the Farm Bill and the USDA, which has had the responsibility of giving loans to farmers and has a pretty horrible track record as far as equity in distributing those loans. Phil, it sounds like you are coming in from the private or the nonprofit sector and trying to fill a bit of that gap with the loans that you're providing. Do you think that that's the future of loans for farmers, or is there hope that we can get back to a more equitable government mechanism?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, there's folks in the government. I mean, Zach Ducheneau, who's the head of the entire risk management agency, which steers all of the loans, is of the Cheyenne tribe from Wyoming. And he's like an amazingly brilliant. His daughter, Kelsey, are deeply tied in. They're like 125th generation farmers, right? Like we can say that, but just incredible. And, he's at the helm, which I think says a lot about what energy and is coming in through the government right now. And at the same time, it's got a massive amount of work to do. We often look for ways to kind of leverage our engagement to get government funds flowing to farms. And it's like woefully bureaucratic. It often doesn't fund the core needs on the balance sheet. And it actually hamstrings as much enables. And so, folks at the National Resource Conservation Service are working on that, but I wouldn't look to that as the tip of the spear of innovation. I think it'll come along for the ride as constituencies cry out in response to need, but it certainly is evolving in a good direction.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. We're right at 2:00. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today and taking the time to share your perspective and the work that your organizations are doing. Hope to see you all at the next session next Wednesday, September 15th. And have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks.